Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight Dave Lubin is back. We are continuing our series in the best years of music. Tonight we are taking a look at 1979. We're going to choose our top 10 albums, talk about them. Hey, we want to hear from you in the chat. What are your top 10 albums as well? So let's get started.
Talking bands no one talks about. Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse. And tonight I want to welcome Dave Lubin to the show. We are continuing our series on the best years in music. Tonight we are going to talk about 1979. If you look in the link below, we did a show already from 1981. So we thought that maybe 1981 was the best year in music, but as we keep looking through these tracks and these albums, 1979 is also a very good year. So tonight we're going to pick our top 10 favorite albums. Now, Dave has given me his list. I've got my list. Some of these are going to probably cross over because we like the same record, but that's good because it just goes to show you how great these albums are. So, without any further ado, let's get this show started. Dave, welcome to the Warehouse. How are you?
I'm doing great tonight, Grant. I'm looking forward to this because I have to admit I was quite surprised when we just decided to do 1979. I said, you know what? I think there might be more albums I liked in 1979 than 1981. I was always under the belief that 81 was my favorite year in rock and roll. And sure enough, I went through all the albums and I said, my God, I bought a lot of albums in 1979. So we got a lot of great music to discuss tonight.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was putting my ranking together, I just I didn't have any preconceived notions of I do have several. There are several 1979 albums that I knew I was going to choose. But a lot of them, I just would have to go out and randomly look or pull out some records and look through some catalogs and stuff. But man, once you review what came out in 1979, it's really amazing how much great stuff there is. So.
Well, I couldn't believe the records I didn't choose, and there are some really awesome ones. So I know that afterwards, and as we did with the 1981, we're going to have some comments saying, what about this? What about that?
Yeah.
But we just picked a bunch of ones. For me, it wasn't, these are pretty much my favorites, although there are some that are missing. One which I'm hoping is on your list. I'm going to find out. But these are some of these albums that they're on because I find them also interesting. They propelled the bands in one way or another. So I'm looking forward to just talking about them and what these albums were in those groups' projectiles.
Yeah, it was hard for me to just choose 10. I don't know about you.
Oh, yeah.
But my ranking could possibly change in the future. But I think I did get the records in my top 10 that really haven't fluctuated that, much from previous years. A lot of these albums, 79 was a big year for me because that's when I really started to listen to music. When you're a kid, all this is new and you just, you take it all in. And some of these records really were influential to me when I was a kid, and I still think highly of them. So a lot of these albums are still in the list from when I was young. You can't escape it.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I was thinking the same thing. It wasn't so much I was starting to get into rock music. I was really starting to develop my own taste because I'm the youngest of three boys. A lot of my tastes were developed by listening to the music that my brothers listened to. And that had influence. So in some of these cases, or certainly specifically one, and I'm going to get to it, what was very significant about it is that I really liked this group and like when they played their albums, and this was the first time I liked that group so much, I went out and got their album, and I was the first one in the family to have it, and I do really like that album. So we're going to get there.
Oh boy, this is going to be fun. All right, Dave, Let's start out. Well, I understand that you didn't rank yours. I kind of rank mine, but it's insignificant really because I like all these records, but they're the top, maybe the top. Oh God, I don't know. I don't even want to say that. It could change. So, but anyway, what is your number 10?
Oh, my number 10. Okay, yeah, I think for number 10, I'm going to go for something that I consider to be. I'm going to call it the key to this album is how interesting I find this album, and that's "Slow Train Coming" by Bob Dylan. The album is interesting because all around, I certainly wouldn't have considered myself a Christian music fan. And I wouldn't have considered myself a Bob Dylan fan by any means. And yet, what I really find interesting is the process. So I even back then, but certainly now more understanding, what drives artists, and you learn things as you grow and older and so forth. it's an understatement to say Bob Dylan, it always is and always will be a prolific songwriter. His vocals are very distinct. If he was to go on American Idol or something, I don't even know if he gets past the first round singing the way he sings, but he writes his own songs and sang them with such passion that in this particular album, he found like a religious awakening. And what I found interesting about it was, again, this can absolutely be classified as Christian music. Who was one of the artists that performed on it? Mark Knopfler. And I was doing some research on the album, and you could almost do a whole show on this album and how he developed this album. Mark Knopfler was kind of uncomfortable to do quote unquote God music, but he basically found that the music was so excellent, so well done, so well thought out that he wanted to be a part of it. Because Mark Knopfler didn't think of himself as putting out this kind of music. And that's what I find interesting. And as I said, there's a whole history of how Bob Dylan got to this point. And I don't really want to get into the religious aspect of it, except to say that he has his message. His message, he's put out these lyrics that are outstanding. You understand what his message is. And the songs are really catchy. And to me, they sound really good. And he's come up with some great tracks on this album. And actually, my favorite one is a song called "When You're Gonna Wake Up." And I think I mean, again, his message is very clear. It sounds catchy, and I remember listening to this album, when I was 15, and this song was like playing in my head. I just found it very catchy. He also had a hit song on it, "Gonna Serve Somebody," peaked at number 24. It's a 5.5-minute song. It won a Grammy. It's been covered by over 50 artists. And as I said, I really like this album. And as I said, I find it a very interesting album in terms of that it was. I think you can almost say it was something very different from how he thought previously. He wrote these in the 60s. He was known for writing these very radical songs. Mm-hmm. And here he found religion. It was important to him, and he wrote some great music.
Wow.
And performed some great music. So that was, I don't know if that's my number 10, but I want to start with that.
Hey, that's a good one to start out with. I did not choose that record, but I know you gave me your list, but I didn't really look at it because it's good to have the list, because when I put this together and have the graphics, it's just going to be easy for me to build it. That's why I need, it's good to have the list. Okay, my number 10. Not necessarily my number 10, but this is where it is today. I'm going to go with a band that really started out as a prog band originally, and then they morphed into more of I would say more of a pop band of some sort. This record was released in December of 79. It's got mainstream rock. I'd say there's a lot of AOR on here. There's a hint of disco on it. This record, I remember back in the day of FM rock radio, they would play a lot of tracks from this. Now you never hear it at all. You never hear it anytime. So my pick is Todd Rundgren and Utopia, Adventures in Utopia. The track, such great music on here because it is very commercial to some degree. It's FM radio friendly. And during this time period, Utopia were playing concerts and they'd be the headline act. I remember they were playing, like Legend Valley here in Ohio then, and they were like one of the main bands on the bill. A lot of time has gone by and a lot of things have changed, but Road to Utopia, classic. And the other thing I want to mention real quick is that everybody in the band sings. You made Road to God, I cannot talk tonight, Dave. I'm having trouble talking. The Road to Utopia, a classic. You Make Me Crazy. Willie Wilcox is singing that. Wonderful. Second Nature, another great Todd Rundgren song. Set Me Free. Chasm Sultan singing that. That's a great song. That was their only hit. Great stuff. Caravan. Like I said, a lot of these tracks got a lot of FM radio play back in the day.
But you're right. We don't really hear him much anymore. But although, am I mistaken? Wasn't it him who replaced Rick Ocasek on
the New Cars?
Singing on the New Cars? Yeah, I think it was Todd Rundgren.
That is one record that I never picked up. I never picked that up. I've never even heard it. But yeah, he did do that. Yeah. But, I think this album's really well thought of after all these years. I think it's considered one of Utopia's best records. I mean, it encompasses so much. Though this isn't my favorite Utopia album, but I like it. So, but heck, 1979, it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. Killer record from this era. All right, what's your number 9?
Again, I don't know if I'm going to call it a ranking, but
Well,
let's go with this guy over here.
okay.
Uh, and I'm going to go with it. So we're going to go with Back to the Egg by Wings. And I definitely really like this album. This album did not do that well critically. It was their final studio album for the Wings. And he went, just so Paul McCartney was not afraid to try things. So first of all, just before this album was released, and he had put out "Don't Say Goodnight Tonight," he put out a disco song.
Yeah, but it's great.
Yeah, and actually, that song is on a later version of a CD. In fact, a little bit of a change in the band. So Jimmy McCullough and Joe English were not part of this band. They were replaced by studio musicians, but Linda and Denny were still there. Denny contributes a song, a very good song, by the way, called Again and Again and Again. So I do quite like that song. Again, I don't really know why the album got poor reviews. It sold very steady, solid. It went platinum. It only had one top 30 song, or it had two top 30 songs, actually, Getting Closer and Arrow Through Me, but those are both very good songs in my opinion. I just think the whole album's actually just very solid, good songs. I do like the way the album starts. So it starts off with an instrumental called Reception, which has got kind of like this weird like radio type thing going on, and then it goes into what I think is the best album. What I think is the best song on the album, which is Getting Closer. But then it goes into like three fast-paced songs, starting with Getting Closer. He does try a bunch of, again, he tries some different things. He has a little bit hint of new wave, a little bit of hint of punk in this album. He's Paul McCartney is Paul McCartney. You give him a challenge, he can take it on. And I think this album kind of got a little bit of a bad rap by the critics, but the public didn't agree. One thing I did notice when I was doing a little bit of research on it is that the album seemed to do a little better in Canada comparatively than it did here in the States. It went platinum here, it went double platinum in Canada, so maybe it was better received there. And maybe, at that time I was living in Canada, so maybe I did hear it more frequently. And I think it's a really good album. Actually, it's one of my top 2 or 3 favorite Wings albums.
Yeah, that is my favorite Wings album. I like it because there's a lot of different styles on it. And when the songs that Paul does, that when he rocks hard, and I like it. I like the Rockester theme. I like the whole thing.
I like the Rockester thing as well. Yeah, I do. I like that a lot.
I kind
I
of
like the thing. I
wish
agree.
I kind of wish that Wings would have kept going though, where they would go.
Yeah, and it's interesting. He had a big cut, like I don't know if you can call it a comeback, but he had a '1 song in his next album. Coming Up was a #1 song, and that was on his next solo effort. So, he had, I guess, different things he wanted to do. So,
Yeah, and that whole thing with him getting arrested in Japan for marijuana possession, and I don't know. I just don't know. It just kind of fell apart,
yeah.
But I think Denny was on, didn't Denny was on the next album, but I think he just dropped out. I think once the band kind of the whole band idea dissolved, I think Denny was losing interest too. But man, you can't tell. I think they all sound great on this record.
Yeah.
Band's great. I have no issues at all with any tracks on it. So
Yeah, I know. I think I agree. It's a good album through and through. It's for me, my #1 Wings album is always will be, and it's always one of my favorite albums. Actually, is Venus and Mars. But this one, as I said, it's I kind of go in between this and At the Speed of Sound between what's 2 and 3. But
I haven't heard any announcements, but I'm hoping that Paul does the deluxe box edition on Back to the Egg. I haven't heard any announcements about it, but I hope he's done all the other records. So I'm assuming
he's done a lot of good versions, that's for sure. So
hopefully that'll come out.
Yeah, as I said, there is a CD out with some bonus tracks. So
yeah, I've got that. That came out, geez, maybe in the 90s. It's fine, but I'm hoping we get that box set treatment. All right, excellent. All right, my next choice, I'm going to go with a band that when I was 13, they were just totally everything to me at that point. I was a big Tommy Shaw fan, and I still am. So I'm going to go with 1979's Cornerstone by Styx, 9th studio album, the 3rd one to go platinum. What can I say? Some people think that this was a slip in quality. I don't know if it's so much a slip in quality. It had, oh yeah, okay, so it had Babe on it. A lot of people are going to complain about that, but it was a big hit. I have no problem with Babe. Why Me was a single. Borrowed Time was a single. Boat on the River, I think that was released in the UK, and Lights was released in the UK. So there were a lot of singles released from this record. But I think overall, I think it's a good effort. It's not quite as hard hitting as what came before, but the production on it, let me look. I can't remember who was doing. Okay. We had a change in production. So we had Rob Kingsland and Gary Laszlo doing productions, and Barry Marantz. I can't remember I can't pronounce his last name. He's out of the picture. So he did all the engineering and all the Styx albums up until that point. So he had like a certain sound. On this record, we kind of have a different change in sound. It's a little bit colder, so to speak. It's not as warm as the productions in the past, but that's okay. I can live with it. It's just I like the songs, and I like all the Tommy material on it. And when I was a kid, I got to see him on this tour. I cannot not list Styx Cornerstone. So
I
I
saw
still
this.
like it.
I saw the Cornerstone tour as well. So last show we did, I dissed on this album a little bit, and then somebody put something in the comments. I kind of relooked at it and I said, you know what? I was too hard on this album. I think what it is that Babe was an overplayed song for me. It wasn't nearly as good as the success that it had in my mind. It
Right.
was an okay song, but I don't think it's anywhere near. It's not their best song. It's not their best ballad. It's not, in my opinion, it's not even the best ballad on that album. I think The First Time for me is a better ballad than Babe is. But I do really like that song. And then there's a couple other songs I really like on that album. So I think what happened is that I forgot that there were some songs that were like A songs for me, including, you mentioned a couple of them. Borrowed Time, Never Say Never is another song I really like on that album. And Eddie, which is actually about, which I learned on that tour, is actually about Ted Kennedy.
Yeah.
Or no, it's actually who I'm losing. I forget what the story was. It's about Ted Kennedy, and they don't want him to run. And I can't remember who. I think he said it was Jimmy Carter's favorite song. Could that be 79? Yeah, that sounds right. It would have been Jimmy Carter's favorite song because he didn't want Ted Kennedy to run for president against him. So that's what it was. I have to think back. So that was an excellent concert though. They played a lot. The Cornerstone was the album they were promoting, but actually the album before was the first Styx album I ever bought, which was Pieces of Eight. And for me, that was kind of like one of those albums that I bought and really, hey, wow, this is really cool. And that album is filled with some great songs, Blue Collar Man, Renegade, etc. So
yeah, my first Styx album was Grand Illusion because my art teacher played it in middle school during art class, and that was the first time I ever heard it. And she would play music during our classes when we were working on projects, and I thought, wow, this is great. So it's funny how
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all I was going to say. It's funny how you can hear something like that. Heck, my art teacher in middle school was an influence.
Well, Grand Illusion was one of those albums I was referring to, or Styx, that the Styx albums prior to Pieces of Eight were purchased by one of my brothers, and he had Equinox and he had Grand Illusion. And then I liked hearing those albums. And then when Pieces of Eight came out, I went out and bought that. So
awesome. God. So good. I still like it. It's not my favorite Styx album, but hey, I don't have any problem with it. I listen to it not all the time. Whenever I'm on a Styx kick, I play it.
Yeah, it definitely has some excellent tracks on it.
All right, Dave. Cool. What's your next one?
All right, so let's talk about this one over here. So this one's kind of an interesting one to me, and that's Toto Hydra. So Toto, you talk about an interesting ascension, descension, and you look at what happened with Toto. There you go.
Yeah, this has got all this stuff in it.
Okay, you got them all. So actually, when you look at like what happened with Toto, so they put out their debut album. Debut album's like a really big hit. They have a monster hit with Hold the Line, but the album itself was an extremely successful debut.
Oh yeah.
And then this one came out. So what went wrong here? Well, I don't think it was the music. The reviews were actually pretty good. But I think what it was this album, it's not a catchy album. The first album was like filled with like these very catchy type tunes that were really good for radio. And then sales-wise, it went, there's the CD. Sales-wise, it went from 2 million albums sold to the first album to 500,000. It only peaked at number 37. And then and then the third album, by the way, Turn Back, it started looking like Toto was going to be kind of like a one-hit wonder because they had the debut sells great. This one kind of does okay. It has 99, which peaks at number 37 on Billboard. So that one got some radio play. And then Turn Back did nothing. It almost looked like, and then of course they had a huge smash hit with Toto 4 with all kinds of hits on that one, which is an excellent album. Anyway, but I don't know. I'm trying to think what went wrong here. I really like it, especially the first three songs in particular. I think just play really well together. Hydra, St. George and the Dragon, and then that leads into 99. So I've always really liked those three songs and how they sound together. And then I find the whole album's pretty good. It's solid. There's no other real standouts on it. I always liked All Us Boys pretty well. White Sister, when the one time I saw a Toto concert, other than 99, that was the only song they did play from this album. But anyway, I thought it was very good. Sometimes I think it is my favorite Toto album, but maybe if I really analyze it, maybe I did like Toto 4 better. But I think it's a damn good album. I think it really does show what excellent musicians they are. I think the music sounds great, but again, I don't think it's as catchy, and I don't know if it was as radio friendly as the first one, and that might.
No, I do know that Hydra's better than this one.
Yeah,
it just seems like Toto's one of those bands. We're getting ready to do the reason I have this is we're going to do a Toto ranking on a show, and I have to prep. But the thing that I find with Toto after blowing through the catalog and listening to it is that, yeah, these are all studio musicians. And this is just a dumb theory, but if you're a studio musician, I think it's probably important that you don't really have much of a tonality, a personal tonality. You have to be just an individual and you play a part and just kind of play the part and not have much personality. I think a lot of the Toto stuff is just, I don't know what I want to say. I don't want to say generic, but a lot of it is kind of faceless to some degree. Now, I have to admit, you look at the first Toto album, Hydra, I think those records really have a lot of personality, and they really have some standout tracks. Some of their tracks that I listen to some of these records, nothing really sticks out in my mind, but those first two records in Toto 4, there's some really great stuff on there,
Yeah, no, well, there's a few other standouts they've had through.
Well, yeah, but
Pamela,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, Pamela was always a standout.
That's a good track.
I love that one. Yeah, I was really enjoying that one. That was a later.
But I don't know. I think that might be one of the things that critics never really they kind of critique Toto about. They're just kind of, faceless to some degree. Nothing that really sticks out and grabs you. But I don't know.
But I did find, and this is sometimes my criticism of some bands, is that what they didn't do was that Hydra didn't sound so similar to the first one, but it was almost too dissimilar that they didn't have a sound. But and I'll talk about, there's that fine tuning, and when we get to another band I'm going to talk about, of having that sound but having that album be different enough that it's interesting. And there are bands that fall into that trap of they have the sound, but it sounds like it's the same album. And then you have other bands, it's their sound, but this album stands on its own. So I'm going to get to one of those. I
will say this: I think the track 99 is one of the best singles of 1979.
Yeah, it's a great song.
Oh, it's a great song.
But I actually like the first two songs on the album better than that one. All right. Yeah, I really like Hydra and St. George and the Dragon. I like the way, as I said, I like those three. Actually, I'm just looking at it again, and then actually that whole side one's really good because Lorraine is a really good song as well. So. And it ends with kind of a cool ballad too, called "The Secret Love." So that was, you have to dig deep, but this was an album that I would listen to from start to finish very frequently. So.
Well, I do have to say that there was no sophomore slump for Toto, because that second album, I think the second album is as strong as the first album.
Oh, I liked it. I definitely liked it better than the first one. I'm not sure. I'd have to really kind of look at, because Toto 4 is really good. Toto 4 is an excellent album. They really kind of fine tune something. It's like it's almost like they learned their mistakes on the third album and then they just like fix it up and then they just came back like big time.
Well, I think that's when Toto 4 was a product of the record company coming down on them saying, you know what? The album before that didn't do anything and there were no hits. Lackluster. We need a hit. And they delivered. I think that's
a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, a whole bunch of them. So it's like the REO Speedwagon. It's their high infidelity, so to speak. Because REO, they were going to say, "Hey, we're dropping you unless we have something. We need a big hit." So
but it didn't take them 10 albums. It took them 3. So
Took them three.
and REO never had anything like their first album. I mean, REO was like one of those bands. They they kind of had their niche of fans, but until that album came out, it was like a scattering here, a scattering there, but didn't have that. Although there as you and I talked about the last show, there was tons of great music there in those early albums. So I had to dig forward or dig backwards to find them, but.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, I like it. All right, Toto, why next one? I'm going to go with I think we've picked one that are in both of our lists possibly. We'll see. Foreigner Head Games. Again, we're going from this era. This is one of those records. Foreigner was like one of the first bands that I heard that when I heard it feels like the first time when I was a kid. It was like one of those moments where everything parts, the water parts, the skies open up, and it's like one of those come to Jesus moments where I go, oh my God, this is great. So right then I was a big Foreigner fan ever since I was a kid. And this continues on to this day. Back in the day, I would say that probably the first 2 albums were my favorite, but this has now turned into my favorite Foreigner album. We've had some lineup changes, but we still have basically, we've got the total big band lineup of Foreigner. It's not down to just 4 members, but the songs on here. Dirty White Boy's great. Head Games is on here. The title track, Rev on the Red Line. The thing about this, they've got Roy Thomas Baker producing. Now, there's one thing that I like the way it sounds, except for one thing. And that's the drum sound on this record. I think the drum sound on this record is absolutely horrible. And I think there was another, what else came out around this time? We had Cars, Candy-O. We've had Queen Jazz. We've had Queen Jazz, though, the drums sound pretty good. But I've never been quite a fan of Roy Thomas Baker production drum sound. And I think the drums on here sound horrible, but I like the way everything else sounds. I think Lou Gramm sounds absolutely great. The guitar riffs from Mick Jones are wonderful. And the thing about this, it's different from the previous records, is that this has a little bit more of a new wave tinge to it. Where the other ones are just pretty much just, you could say arena rock. I don't think that existed then, but they were just more straight ahead rock and roll. But this is still rock and roll, but you sprinkle a little bit of new wave on top of it, along with that AOR, that rock sound, and this is what you get. I like this record. It still stands up. I'm not sure if we could produce a song like 17 again and get away with it, but
there's a lot of songs like that.
Yeah, I know, back in the day. But the modern day Blinded by Science, I like it all. I like it better than Foreigner 4, and I think Foreigner Foreigner was the last hurrah for me. But this, I think it's great. Still got Ian McDonald, and it's too bad Ian didn't continue on with the band, because I always like Ian McDonald and his sax work and all that, but it's not the vision that Mick Jones had.
Well, this album, so adding a little bit to what you had to say, because it was on my list. You're absolutely correct. Like you, I have to kind of think about what really is my favorite Foreigner album, but this gets strong consideration. In my notes, I put it's the most fun Foreigner album, because so it's interesting you call it new wave. Now maybe that's the Roy Thomas Baker influence, because he that's when he was really working with the Cars, so that maybe his influence is there. But anyway, I still consider that their hardest rocking album. In terms of its success, it peaked at number 5, so it was really good. However, Mick Jones, I guess, felt that that wasn't good enough, and then I actually watched a show about it. And he was not happy with the album, and that's why he made the changes that he did, and why he went to Foreigner 4, and he went to the 4-piece band. But I mean, as I said, it went to number 4. It sold a few million copies. I want to add a couple of deep tracks that you didn't mention that I've always actually, my favorite song on this particular album is "I'll Get Even with You." I don't know if I've ever heard that on radio, but that was my favorite.
Never.
But another one I really liked was "Women." "Love on the Telephone" was released as a single, but it didn't. But nevertheless, those are. But I put down those are my favorite songs in the albums are "Women," "Love on the Telephone," "I'll Get Even with You," and then "Rev on the Red Line" would be in there too. I actually found "Rev on the Red Line" was the catchiest one.
Oh, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Foreigner songs. That and Head Games, kind of like a toss-up. But I think Rev on the Red Line, what a way to end an album.
Oh yeah, it was.
Wow, what a
And,
way to
and
end an album.
and that did get played on rock radio, by the way.
Oh, it still does. And I want to say that the other thing I liked about these early Foreigner records is that Mick Jones would sing a couple of tracks. This is the last album that Mick Jones took
Mhm.
a vocal on
Yep.
the modern day. And I always thought it was nice. Did he have a voice as good as Lou? No. But, it kind of broke up the album a bit. And I think it was decent. And I always like all the songs that he sang. So I hate to see that this period end, but it is what it is. And, hey, Foreigner's going in the Rock Hall. So who am I?
Yeah, and overdo it. And here's the thing: it's the next album they put out was their biggest hit ever, and
Mhm.
and it was on my list for 81 as well. So it's not like no disappointment for me there. And they just did like different kind of music. And again, we were just talking about. I find the thing about Foreigner is that you look at those first four albums, they're all different enough, and yet they do have a distinct sound. And that's what I kind of look for with these bands.
Yep. It's a great record. I like it. All right.
Great choice. I think that's our first one that's the same. So there you go.
All right. Well, I think we covered that one pretty well. All right. My next one I'm going to go with, and I don't remember if this is on your list, but I think this album I think is considered this artist's best record. It was quite different than the first two records. This is the third album by this artist, and it was a big hit. I'm going to go with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Damn the Torpedoes. I think, and I think this is one of his best albums. This has been on multiple lists, 500 greatest albums of all time. People have ranked this. It got a lot of great reviews when it came out. Now, it did get some people thought it was a bit of a sellout. I don't think so. I think, they got Jenny Iovine on there, and I think it's just he's a good producer. Shelly Yankis is a great engineer. They just knew what to do with this band. And Tom Petty came with the songs. Holy crap, Don't Do Me Like That. Fabulous. Refugee,
Right.
fabulous. Here Comes My Girl.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Even the Losers.
Yeah.
Well, that came out only in Australia, but still, I'm counting it as a fourth single. What did this get on the chart? How far did this get?
I think it's a number one album. I think.
I
Feel
think
like
it
it
was
was.
number one.
Feel like it was. I
Um,
did. I remember
okay,
like that year just hearing it so much. I mean,
got to number two,
okay.
but unheard of because I don't think those other two records particularly sold that much. So
No,
yeah, Breakdown, great song, you know. But I think the second album was always considered a bit of a letdown, even though that's my second favorite Petty album. But I think that this record really is a perfect record. There's nothing weak on it. The production's great. Mike Campbell's guitar parts are great, and the songs are great. Come on, it's a great record. 1979, love it.
Well, that was one that it didn't make it's not on my list, but I was very much hoping that it was going to be on yours. So I'm glad you brought that one up. I do own that one. It was the first Tom Petty album I owned because I wasn't familiar with him. Although, once I recognized the song Breakdown because then when they went into the backlist. American Girl is also I think from the first two albums. Although I think maybe that might have become more famous after Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I'm not sure. So
I think that became more famous with Silence of the Lambs.
uh, I remember more from Fast Times at Ridgemont High when
Was it in that too?
washing his car. Yeah, Brad's washing his car, and anyway, with or Judge Reinhold. So
All right.
that's where I really remember that song from. That's why I was more of a fan of that movie than I was Silence of the Lambs. So.
Well, it put a different spin on it. All right, cool. What's your next one?
All right, let's. I have a feeling this one's going to be on your list. I don't know why, but I'm
Maybe.
thinking that. But let's.
I'm not going to say yet.
So I'm thinking that maybe it's your number one. I think that this could be my number one of the year. It's a fantastic album. So I talked about with Foreigner. So Cars put out their first album, and again, the sound is I know this is Cars, but
Yeah.
that was the problem for me with Boston with their debut and Don't Look Back. To me, it was the same album. This to me, it was not the same album. It was distinctive. It sounded like that was the same group, but they followed up. And what's interesting about the debut is Cars' debut is often considered to be an album called, some people call it the Cars' greatest hits, because think of how many of those songs are hits and are still played so frequently on rock radio today.
Yeah.
But this one, I like this one better actually. Now it's not my favorite Cars album. Maybe in a later show I'll get to which one my favorite. But this is an awfully good album. Everything on this, it's another one of those albums that to me everything's good. There's one track I never really quite got Shooby Doo, but I'll forgive him. I never quite got the point. One of my favorite songs on this album is a deep track, Night Spots, and apparently Night Spots was a song that didn't make the cut on the first album. And everything else on this album was written after the first album, but Night Spot was one that was a holdover, and they said, okay, let's put it on this one. It never became a hit per se, but it was played in concerts. I saw the Knack and ELO show. They opened up with Got a Lot in My Head, and they played a lot. Obviously, there was only 2 albums, so they had to play a lot of songs to this. They played the entire debut, and they actually played most of this one too. They only had one top 40 hit, Let's Go, but that was a great choice because it's probably the catchiest song on the album, so it makes sense. It's also the one that opens it. And when I talk about my 3 favorite songs on this album, I went with Night Spots, Got a Lot in My Head, and Let's Go. So what can I say? It sold 4 million copies, made number 3 on Billboard. Great album.
Great record. And this really is my number 2 album. If I'm really this is my second favorite album from 79. I might as well piggyback on what you started. I think this record and the debut album, you could take both of those records, and I've said this before, take all the tracks, disassemble them, put them in a jar, shake them up, and you could reconfigure the records because the tonality, even though one was recorded in the States, one was recorded in England, they both sound like the same record to me. It's like part 1 and part 2. And I think this, to me, I know this is contrarian, this is my favorite Cars album. Let's Go, Benjamin Orr leading it off. Anything with Benjamin Orr, any Benjamin Orr track, I'm in because I love Benjamin Orr, and I love the blend when Rick Ocasek and Orr sing together. Like Since I Held You, great. It's All I Can Do, another Benjamin Orr. This is some of Ben Orr's greatest stuff. And it's so varied because you go from Let's Go and you've got Candio, which is, I would say that's full blown new wave.
So is Night Spots though, in my opinion.
And Night Spots.
Yeah.
You can't hold on too long. Great Rick Ocasek. Lust for Kicks, another great Ocasek song.
And what a finish with Dangerous Type. I mean, that was probably, I would say it's fair to say that was the second biggest hit on the album, and it was the last song.
It's the last song. Great, but it makes you long for what's coming. It ends so great. It's just like Rev on the Red Line. It's like, man, if this is the last song on the record, what are we going to have on the next record? So I think this is a perfect record. I don't see anything, like you mentioned, Shooby Doo. That's just, but think about it. How else could you go into Candio other than Shooby Doo? They go to hand in hand.
That's true. That's true. The way it kind of mixes in with Candio is great. Oh, by the way, one thing we didn't mention, I just
go ahead.
A little bit of trivia. What was the first Cars song that was played on MTV, even though it was 2 years old? It was Double Life. It was number 21, heard on MTV on August 1st, 1981. So just a little bit of trivia there for you.
So anyway, I like Shooby Doo because it seems to go hand in hand with Candio.
That's fair.
I think there's anything weak on it. I love it. Perfect sequencing, perfect record. Love it. And the drums on here are okay. Something with Roy Thomas Baker and drums. I just don't know what it is, but whatever. It's still a great record.
Well, what he touched turned to gold in that particular era because he just seemed to be producing everybody who was everybody he produced. That just seemed to win, including another album which we're going to talk about.
And the other thing I should mention, since we are talking the Cars, the brilliant Elliot Easton, one of my favorite guitar players ever. Tasty, all of his solos are well thought out. You know, obviously he's just not going for it. He works all this stuff out. So when he lays down that solo, it's the perfect solo for the song.
Well, I think actually they're all great musicians in my opinion. Another one. I mean, I'm always a keyboards guy, so I really appreciate what Greg Hawkes does for these albums, especially in songs like Moving in Stereo and what he adds there. So
Jeff Workman was the engineer on this, and I'm not sure. I'm looking. Let me go backwards. Oh, I have to go backwards a lot. Jeff Workman was the engineer on Head Games too.
One of the nice things about the Cars also was that this lineup
Mhm.
lasted pretty deep into the band's history. I mean, I think we were at least five, if not six albums deep. They went with these five guys. So,
Yeah.
and I
So
like the consistency of it. It's always interesting to me and I'm going to bring that up in another album that we're going to talk about. But it's always interesting to me when I see like somebody drops out and when they drop out and what
mhm.
caused that drop. And you can get the information on that. So.
All right, cool. Excellent. All right. What's your next pick?
All right, so we're gonna go with me again. All right, let's.
Well, I don't know. I just went with the car, so I jump. Oh, well, that was my pick.
I think I went with the Cars, but it was on both of ours. So I'll.
So I
Uh,
went with my next pick. That was my next pick.
oh, okay. Well, there you go. So this album, actually, so this is what I was referring to. I figured, okay, I made a reference to it. So this was my introduction to Journey. I had never heard of Journey, and then one day I heard Love and Touch and Squeezing on the radio. Now here was the interesting about that. I thought it was a good song, but what was interesting was it wasn't like I heard it, I said, wow, this is the greatest song ever. And yet something about it was like, I want to know more about this. Who is this band Journey? Like, I don't know what it is about this song. I like it. I don't love it, but I just had a feeling that that there was something here.
Hmm.
So I just went out and bought the album on a song that I thought was good, but not. And then sure enough, I found out they said, yeah, I really like this album. So this album was their fifth. And it was clearly the ascension had started. So Infinity was the first album that sold pretty well. They had a couple of radio hits, not anything too huge, and then they had this one, Love and Touch and Squeezing gets number 15. But one of the things about this album is that, in my opinion, Love and Touch and Squeezing, which is the biggest hit on the album, is actually the weakest song on the album because I like just about every. If I'm going to rank every song on this album, it's not that it's a bad song, but I
Right.
probably like the other 10 or 11 songs on this album better. My personal favorite songs on the album actually is Majestic, coupled with Too Late, and then the other thing we were talking about how groups sort of get away with like sharing vocals. I always like Just the Same Way, and it has Greg Rowley sharing lead with Steve Perry. I don't know how often they ever even did that again, but not very frequently. I think maybe because Steve Perry didn't like having having the spotlight taken away from him. But that
Maybe.
I think that song sounds fantastic with the two of them actually, and the way they go from one vocal and blends into the other. They have a few other songs in there earlier on the Infinity album that are like that. But anyway, I think it's anyway, I was absolutely correct. But anyway, I was inferring about a band member change. So Ainsley Dunbar leaves the group after they finally have start having some success with Infinity, and he's replaced by Steve Smith. So I always find those kinds of changes interesting. I was looking up Lou Ainsley Dunbar. I mean, he was a pretty accomplished musician, worked for a
Yeah.
lot of different groups, and he just up and left this group just before they became like what Journey eventually became. They were on their ascension here, but they had not peaked.
Hmm.
There was a lot of peaking to do after this album. So
Ainsley Dunbar, incredible drummer, and of course Steve Smith had a jazz background, great drummer as well. But Ainsley Dunbar is a machine. If you ever listen to his drum work, but he was been playing since the '60s. So
yeah, no, I was looking. His resume is like really impressive, but it just makes me think like what gets him to say, okay, we just had our first taste of success. I think I'll just leave now. But I've seen that in other groups. It's not the first time
yeah,
I've seen that. So then I guess if there's dissension among the groups or who knows. I don't know what the story was behind it. I just found it interesting. So
is he playing on Jefferson Starship Freedom at Point Zero? I think Ainsley Dunbar is the drummer on that.
okay,
That's
so maybe
79.
okay, so maybe he went to that.
Hmm.
And that would have been a big hit album too. That would have been
Yeah, I was gonna that I could easily pick that too, but I didn't. I love that record. I love that record.
That was Jane, right? Was that the Jane
Yeah,
album? Yeah, okay.
like the whole thing. No Grace Slick on that one. No
No,
Marty Ballin, but
no.
you got Mickey Thomas, you've got Paul Kantner. It's I like it. A lot of people probably go, really, that album? I don't know. I dig it.
It was like Jane. I was like that song.
Good song. All right. Excellent choice.
That's Journey.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with one that we've talked about before in a series that we did here. This is the band's eighth studio album. Uh, Great songs on here. This probably is considered their best record. It could be one of the two. This, along with The Nature of the Beast, I think are considered their best albums. Though we did a ranking on the band April Wine, and everybody ranked the catalog differently. So check that out below. The link's below. But I'm going to go with the 8th studio album, Harder, Faster. Oh, and it's probably like one of their biggest selling records, I think, at this time. It's got I Like to Rock, which is an anthem. Say Hello, which is kind of like a pop. I guess that's more of a pop song. There's a lot of different styles on here, but it does rock out. They do a cover version of 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson. And I think for a cover version, that is the most definite cover version. And what a way to end the album, though, with that. Man, makes a statement. Brian Greenway, who joined on the previous record, does a song called Before the Dawn. Great stuff. I like the whole thing. Babes in Arms, yet another great rocker. Like the whole thing. Yeah, it got pretty good reviews back in the day too. And this is considered the April Wine classic lineup. Miles Goodwin, Brian Greenway, Jerry Mercer, Steve Lang, and Gary Moffat. It's just a great record. Go check it out if you haven't already. And it did pretty well. The album, I'm looking at the chart, it got up to 64 here. The Nature of the Beast was a way bigger record than this, but they're starting to get some traction here on this record in the States. So,
Yeah, well, certainly with me, I'm never going to argue with you about them. If I'm picking my top 10, they're certainly in my top 10. They're probably that album's probably my top 5. My goal here was more to talk about other albums because I did talk about this one. I think I when we did the ranking, and as you pointed out, when I'm ranking those eight April Wine albums between Electric Jewels and Power Play, it's so hard for me, really. Although typically I always conclude Stand Back's my favorite, but
yeah,
Harder Faster, I mean, it's sort of like somewhere between a 3 and a 4. It was their hardest rocking album. There's not a bad song on the album. I mean, every single song for me is a fantastic song. Actually, you just mentioned what's probably my favorite deep track on the album is Babes in Arms. Actually, interesting. I got this. I was gonna show this a little bit later. This is the single for I Like to Rock. And the but what's interesting is that the B side is a song that I like better than
Babes
I Like
in
to Rock,
Arms.
and that's Babes in Arms. Babes in Arms is that one and Say Hello are probably my 2 favorites. And then another great deep track on that album I love is Better Do It Well.
I don't think they released any singles off that record here in the States. Do you know?
I Like to Rock actually was the only one that got some charting. It did decently well on AOR stations here. The problem with that album is it other than the AOR stations, it didn't do anything, and it was very market specific. I think one of the reasons you heard it is because I think Ohio was actually, especially Columbus area, was one of their stronger areas. So they had like a few pockets where they were definitely getting some traction. I heard one of their biggest problems actually was, and it's in his book, is that he never was able to quite break New York City, and that was and that's kind of what prevented, let's say, Nature of the Beast from being, let's say, a top 25 album to, like, a top 10 or something like that. So they got lapped that year by Loverboy, who they became the hot Canadian band. So nevertheless, anyway, it's a great album. It's great rockers. You get to hear with, I mean, these 3 guys, Gary Moffat, Miles Goodwin, and Brian Greenway, such excellent guitarists and fantastic drummer, and Jerry Mercer, who just recently turned 85.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, this was a single here in the States.
Yeah, it reached like number 86 or something.
Say Hello was a single, and I Like to Rock.
Now, Say Hello did it did very well in Canada. That Say Hello still gets played. I mean, it doesn't, for a long time I covered Canada coast to coast for my job, and that was definitely one of the. I would turn to the classic rock station wherever it was, and Say Hello gets played all the time. Still gets played all the time in Toronto. So.
Yeah, I never hear it anymore now. Well,
yeah,
not here, not in Central Ohio.
Did it get played in the day in here? Or, like, I know I Like to Rock.
Yeah,
because I Like to Rock. I remember hearing. We used to go to Florida, and I remember hearing I Like to Rock in Florida, but I never heard anything else from this album played.
Yeah, they used to play that. That's where I really heard this record.
Right.
So it is what it is. But First Glance got, Roller was kind of a big hit. Well, FM radio hit, so to speak. They still play that. What did that do? Okay. I'm looking
That
at
was
the
a top
US
40.
Billboard Hot 100 and Roller
32.
it got to 34.
Oh, 34. Okay.
So, hey, that was way more impressive than anything else that came after until Nature of the Beast. So, hey, good for
Well,
Roller.
well, quickly, I actually know the story of that. The story was First Glance got released. They got a um, they got a contract with Capitol Records. They finally had a big label in the States releasing their albums. And what happened was it was released, it was out for something like 10 months or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They released two other singles, including Rock and Roll is a Vicious Game from that album, which is a fantastic song in my opinion. But anyway, and a radio station in Flint, Michigan discovered Roller, and then it became a hugely requested song in Michigan, and I imagine that bled down to Ohio, and eventually it became a top 40 single, and they finally had a hit, and then through that they had Harder Faster sold better as an album than First Glance did, and in fact, over time it became a gold record, and Nature of the Beast did pretty well. It was a platinum album, and then Power Play was a disappointment. But anyway, for those of your listeners who don't know them, April, your listeners must know April Wine now. We've done them to death. So,
Well, everybody should know. No one
yeah,
should be surprised that I picked it. So,
yeah, no, and I was hoping you would. I just, I'm
all
gonna
right.
tell if it's, you know what, I'm gonna bring out this one. This is one day maybe you'll check out this band. So this is an album
Yeah.
by a Canadian group. They are from the Vancouver area. They're called Prism. So this was their third album. It was their best-selling album in Canada. In fact, they sold 200,000 copies, which doesn't sound like very much, but don't forget we're a country of just 37 million people, so 200,000 is pretty darn good. In terms of what type of group, I would call this a synthesizer-based rock group, and they have very distinctive vocals by a singer named Ron Tabak. So basically, Prism had a pretty successful debut album with a absolutely fantastic song. They blew out of the gates. Their very first song on their first album was a song called Spaceship Superstar. It's a fantastic. If you're gonna listen to one Prism song, that's the one. It's an absolutely fantastic song. I still think that's the best song they ever did. But anyway, so it got a lot of radio play, and then the second album they did was called See Forever Eyes. Again, very steady. What's interesting about them is that they did get some notice in the States, and when I look at them in Wikipedia, some of those songs actually, had some kind of, or let's say top maybe 80-ish or something like that, 70th. So they got some notoriety in some areas, I think, in the United States. I'm going to guess it was on the West Coast, maybe bleeding from Vancouver into Seattle, places like that. But anyway, so getting back to this album, this is probably their best overall album. So three of these songs were actually written or co-written by Bryan Adams. One of the songs on this album he recorded on the You Want It, You Got It album is called Jealousy. If people want to check out this album, in my opinion, the three best albums are the opener, Coming Home, and then You Walked Away Again, which was written by Bryan Adams. You can actually find a bootleg copy of him singing that song, and you can compare it to the Prism guy. Actually, what I find interesting is that he kind of sounds like Ron Tabak in that album. So it's almost like when he was like doing a demo, he wanted to make himself sound like the lead singer who's actually going to be singing the song. And there's an excellent rock ballad on this album called Night to Remember. It's kind of like a Tonight's the Night type of theme, but it's a softer tone. And then finally, there's the title track. It's an 8-minute anthem. The album is called Armageddon. It's about an Armageddon. And you can actually find on YouTube Canadian high school bands sometimes playing it. So, because it's a complex song with a lot of arrangements involved, and you can do quite a bit with that with a high school band. So it's fun. And one of the problems they had with this album is that this album did pretty well. I got to see what the label. Okay, this one is something called Magnum. So probably oh yeah, okay. This is so it's okay. The producer is called GRT. In spite of the fact they had a success with this, the producer actually the album label actually went bankrupt afterwards. So anyways, if if your American listeners are looking for something new to listen to, check out this. I think you can find it on Spotify, and there's some good music, and as I said, you find early shades of early Bryan Adams on these albums.
Well, people have mentioned you should look into Prism. You should do a Prism show, but I'd have to.
Yeah, you'd have to dig.
I'd have to dig.
Basically, you can stop at 5. I mean, there's these three albums. Quite honestly, the album they did after this was like a complete bomb, and then the lead singer, and there was a fight with the lead singer, and then the fifth album I think has a song you might have heard called "Don't Let Him Know," because it was actually that song actually made #1 on the Billboard rock track, so you might know that one.
Yeah. Oh God, I'd have to hear it.
And it charted. Yeah, yeah, that one you might know. But anyway,
Probably.
so
If I heard it.
anyway, something to think about called
All right.
Prism,
Excellent.
Vancouver rock band.
All right. Super. My next one is going with a band that I'm more fairly, well, I came into this band from someone's recommendation. Like, Grant, you should get this. Came out in 1979, of course. Came out on Epic. This band is you could definitely consider this band a pop rock band. There are elements of Styx, there's elements of Queen, there's elements of Sweet, there's elements of Sparks, Bebop Deluxe. It is a conglomeration of different styles. The songwriting on here is absolutely wonderful. The vocals on here you'd kill for. I've played this band on my listening parties. Anytime I have a listening party that where this band would fit in, I always play a damn song from it to turn people onto it. And I'm talking about the band Avary from 1979. Now, people don't know about Avary. They put out that one record in 79, Sank Without a Trace. You go on Discogs, look for the band Avary, and all you'll find are a lot of white label promos for sale. Now, I don't know if the record didn't make it to the stores. I don't know what the background is, but it is a wonderful record. These guys were veterans of the Washington, Seattle music scene. Couple of bands, Bighorn and Russia were some of them. This was the lead singer was a gentleman, Brian Lane. Absolutely phenomenal. Gary Lyons, who did like engineering. Well, he's a producer, but I think he's done some engineering. Foreigner, UFO, Lone Star. He produced the record. Absolutely just the craziest record you've ever heard. Is it commercial? Well, to some degree, but it sure is fun. And I would say this is probably, if you're into pump rock, this is the best pump rock album I've ever heard. Highly recommended. Avary. If you don't have it, you need to own it. And I have nothing to do with Avary. I don't know any of the band members. I just listened to this record and I cannot believe that it fell by the wayside. The CD is available on Rock Candy. So support the band, support Rock Candy. Please get the CD because I think everyone should hear this record. I love it. I put it in my damn ranking. So there you go.
Yeah, it sounds kind of familiar to me. So I'm wondering if maybe Shalom FM back in the day might have played it a tiny bit, maybe because it sounds familiar.
Yeah, I can't imagine they'd play it today.
Yeah, well,
For the USA is a great track. Mystic Sharon is absolutely unbelievable. Mystic Sharon is probably the most commercial, more accessible because some of it it's pretty out there. But man, these guys were good. And you look at the album cover, I'll put the graphic here. They looked like Typhoon. Remember the band Typhoon? That era? It's kind of like that. They just look like they all got nice shirts on. You would never think that this band sounds like this, but it's great.
So we got two things maybe for people to check out. We got Prism
Definitely.
and we got Avary. So
Yes,
maybe a couple of things that people didn't know about. So
there you go.
or
All
me
right.
for that one.
Hey, all this show's trying to do is turn you on to stuff. That's all we're doing. Plus, we like to talk music, but really, we're just trying to throw stuff out there and hopefully you can get turned on to something. So, but people that follow my show know my feelings about Aviary. They know I love it. So, all right, Dave, what's up for you?
All right, let's go with this, which kind of surprised me when I looked at the performance of this album. I was a little bit surprised. So Joe Jackson in 1979 actually put out two albums. His first two albums, and in my opinion, his best two albums, were the same year.
Mm-hmm.
So I had trouble deciding, well, which one of these albums do I want to talk about because they're both so darn good. I went with this one. I think I like this one just like a smidgen better than the first one, although depends on the day of the week, I suppose. The Joe Jackson's kind of an interesting musician to me in that he's kind of similar to Bryan Adams in that I like his first two albums better than anything else that he ever did. So this album, it peaked at number 22 on Billboard, but I looked at it. Apparently, it has no certification in the United States at all. It didn't sell 500,000 copies. I feel like
Really?
I don't know if it's a mistake or, but there's no notification. It's hard for me to believe that that including when it was released on CD, there's not 500,000 copies of this sold that is at least gold.
But I don't think Joe was a big seller here. I mean, Night and Day was the biggest record he ever had.
Well, okay, so maybe it's a Canadian thing because this album did go platinum in Canada, and I feel like I feel like at the time I remember hearing On Your Radio, Kind of Cute. It's different for girls. I'm the man. I heard those songs all the time. But anyway, this is there's not a bad song on this album. Every single song is fantastic. I particularly like the first song of this album, On Your Radio. It's just such like a fun song, and it's kind of like many people's dreams to be able to say, "Hey, look at me now," to all those people who used to know me. It's the lyrics of it are fantastic, and he sings it just great. But then, as I said, it's different for girls. Is a neat ballad. His songs are very clever, and this is another song that ends fantastic. Friday is a fantastic song, and it's a great song. It's a great album ender. And actually, the last two songs they go so well together, and that's "Get That Girl" and "Friday." So, I don't know. Maybe this album really was a much bigger hit in Canada than it was in the United States. I know the debut album did pretty well here, but I don't think this one did as well here. But I think in Canada he kept up the pace. So, but this one, as I said, this one in the debut, it's kind of apples and oranges as far as which one I like better. But it's a fantastic album. So
Yeah,
I'll go with that.
All right, cool. Excellent. All right, my next one, I'm going to go with, well, this artist is still producing out. This artist still produces several albums a year, but we're talking about his 1979 album, Neil Young and Crazy Horse, Rust Never Sleeps. Recorded live, first half of it's acoustic, second half is electric, and boy, is it electric. What a great record. All the tracks. I mean, if you look at it, a lot of these tracks on this record were like old tracks from back in the day. If you Powderfinger's an old song. There's a reissue, I can't remember what it's called, but it was really on another album. But of course the live version's here. But man, this one he electrified it. I think this is one of his greatest songs he ever written. My Hey Hey is Into the Black or Into the Blue, whichever one. Into the Black is the electric version, Into the Blue is the acoustic version. Great. They got in 1979 they played this all the time. But the whole thing is great. Seat and Delivery, that used to get a lot of play on the radio back in the day. But I think you just never know when Neil's going to hit one out of the park because he just does what he wants. He puts out a record, and if it takes off, it takes off. But I think Rust Never Sleeps is one of those records where everything totally worked. Nothing weak on it. No, there's no songs on here you skip over. People know what this record is. I don't have to really go into it, but it is one of my favorite albums in 1979.
It's a classic for sure.
It is.
All right, should I move on?
Go, you're up.
All right, let's do this one. All right, so interesting history of this one, Cheap Trick, Dream Police. So what happens with Cheap Trick? Well, they put out 3 albums. None of them do anything that great, and then all of a sudden this import gets released somehow at the beginning of 1979 called Live at Budokan, and it's the imported album Live at Budokan that like breaks this group from just kind of like an opening band into an outright supergroup. People suddenly discovered, hey, wait a minute, these guys have all these great songs, but they are fantastic live. I've actually had the privilege of seeing them a few times, and I can kind of see once I saw them live, I kind of understood why it kind of took the live album to kind of propel them. But so what they did actually was they actually delayed releasing this thing. This album was supposed to be released earlier in 1979. They had a little bit more success with the previous album, Heaven Tonight. They thought, okay, we'll release this one, and there's some very catchy songs on it, which we'll discuss in a second. And they said, well, wait a minute, Budokan was this huge hit, so they delayed releasing this album till the fall. And the result was it peaked on number 6 on Billboard, had 2 hits, Voices and the title track. What's interesting is usually for most of these albums, I've been basically saying, well, I like this deep track, I like that deep track is my favorite. Honestly, for this particular album, Voices and Dream Police are my two favorites. The rest of the album
Wow.
are just sort of good, solid rockers, and there's nothing I don't like on it. But I do think that those are, for me anyway, those are the two best songs in the albums. And then what happened actually afterwards is this was a big hit, but then they had trouble kind of following this up. They kind of started like going down, going down. People kind of started forgetting about them, and it took them till 1988 till they kind of finally had another huge hit album that was on the par with this one, and that was with Laugh with Luxury, and then that one
Ugh.
had two hit songs, of course, with The Flame and Ghost Town. So
Ugh. Ugh.
you did not like
Not
that
my.
album.
Ugh.
You did not like that.
Commercial,
Okay.
commercial slop. That's Cheap
Uh,
Trick. That's not real Cheap Trick. Don't get me started. All right. My number.
I did like the one that followed it though. The one that had like I actually have that one with Stop That Game and
Oh, uh, there it is right here. Oh, for God's
that's the
sake.
Stop That Game album.
Well, that's the original promo poster.
Okay.
Uh,
That's one of my favorite Cheap Trick songs.
That's a good record. That's a good record too. Well, that's where I think the things started to forms where cracks were starting to form, but that's a whole other show, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
All right. My choice, that is my number 3 as well, though I've ranked my rankings all screwed up now, but this is my next one, Cheap Trick, Dream Police. Yeah, and I think what kind of put the kibosh on it is that people had to wait so long to get to it because Need Your Love was on the live record, but it was the studio version here. And people were going, well, we just had it on the live album. And that's better than the studio version. I don't necessarily agree, but Need Your Love, I think, is great. Gonna Raise Hell is a classic. I like everything on Dream Police. I don't see it. Some critics said that was a little bit, there seemed to be a loss in quality. I do not detect anything. If anything, they're being a little bit more experimental. They've got Tom Werman producing it. Tom Werman was, as far as I'm concerned, ladies and gentlemen, and you can quote me, don't listen to Martin Popoff. But God, I just had a brain problem. Where was I going to go with that? I'm really having an off night, Dave. I really can barely function. I don't know why. I hadn't done anything. Fixed the gutter earlier. All right. 3, 2, 1. So, ladies and gentlemen, don't listen to what Martin Popoff says, but Tom Werman was the only producer, as far as I'm concerned, for Cheap Trick. Jack Douglas comes up with a strong second, but Jack Douglas failed on Standing on the Edge. Had Jack Douglas carried through and produced it, it might have been a different story, but that's a whole other thing. Don't get me on a rant that I'm already on a rant. Tom Werman knew exactly what to do with Cheap Trick. When you hear those Tom Werman albums, In Color, Heaven Tonight, Dream Police, it sounds like Cheap Trick. Rick Nielsen's guitar sounds like Rick Nielsen. You go see Cheap Trick in concert, this just sounds like Cheap Trick in the studio playing live. Yeah, there's some strings on Dream Police, but man, the band sounds great. After this, you had Todd Rundgren. I'm on a rant. I can't control myself. So you got Todd Rundgren producing, totally changed the guitar sound. It doesn't sound like Cheap Trick anymore. Yeah, you might have Robin singing on it, but does it really have that Cheap Trick sound? No. That's why these early albums were so great, because there's a lot of rawness. There's a lot of great songwriting. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm on a rant. But
well, by the
Dream
way,
Police, I think Dream Police is not a step down in quality. It's a continuation. And I think it kind of lost some motivation because Budokan really shouldn't have come out. But hey, I like Budokan. For a live record, it's a great live record. But it kind of screwed up Cheap Trick to some degree, you know? But yeah, I think Dream Police is great. I think it's one of those that's a great quote unquote fourth record, you know?
Yeah, as I say, it was the first one that I bought, but I did eventually buy In Color and Heaven Tonight. So
I think it's great. I like all of it.
Prior albums, yeah, I did. I actually found, okay, yeah, I get this, but it's kind of a mix because some of the songs I like better. I like the original better, but like something like I Want You to Want Me sounds much better in the live version than it does.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
But I'd still take In Color. I have no issues with In Color at all.
Oh, it's a good album. Well, a lot of those songs are from.
All right, I guess we're down to our number. We should be at our number 1.
Yeah, I'll
or
call it
whatever our last pick.
Yeah, I don't know if I think it's your turn, but when I get to it, I'll call it my number 1.
Well, no, I said Dream Police is my next one, and now we only have our next one. So
Oh, so what should we do? Should it be me or you?
It doesn't matter. I can go.
All right, go
But
for
I
it.
felt like I just went. But all right, this will always be my number one. This record I heard, I think it was the summer of 79 when it came out. I remember hearing it, thinking it was one of those moments where the skies opened up and I couldn't believe because we were in that era of disco, ladies and gentlemen, and Saturday Night Fever and all that. And this came on the radio and it was a perfect blend of 60s Beatles, Kinks, mid 60s Rolling Stones, whatever you want to say. But I'm going to go with Knack, the Knack, Get the Knack, which is always going to be my number one because of when I was a kid. And I remember getting that record, went to the Music Land, was able to buy it, went home and recorded it on my little cassette and played it on my little radio, riding my bike around, listening to the Knack, Get the Knack. I love everything on it. It was like a breath of fresh air when it came out. And I don't know why they ended up getting backlash from the record label because these guys used to be the critics' darlings in that whole LA scene when they would play the Whiskey A Go-Go. The critics loved them. Bands would come up. We'd have, Steven Stills would jam with them. Bruce Springsteen would jam with them. Ray Manzarek jammed with them. The bands loved them. They were a breath of fresh air. And then once they got signed and had success, then the critics turned on them. But don't let that influence you at all. I think Get the Knack is a great record. It's sold, gosh, what was it? It was spent 5 weeks at number one on the Billboard 200, and it recorded in 2 weeks. Mike Chapman was the producer, and it sold 1 million copies in 2 months. So that's a great success. Yeah, the critics didn't want that. They didn't want the Knack to have success. They wanted them to be their own little, this is kind of our band. And when they have a big hit, well, then they slammed them. It wasn't fair, but I love that record. It changed my whole life when I was a kid, and I think it's still strong. I mean, it sounds very live. It is live. They played everything live in the studio. They were such a good live band, and they played so many gigs. They were so fine-tuned. They just went into the studio and blew it out and played it. Amazing.
Well, that album would have been in my top, definitely would have been one of my choices, but I knew from our last show, I said, no, I got to leave that one for Grant because I knew it would be, when you had picked that third album, I said, oh, he must really like the first one. Yeah. But it definitely would have been up there. They were unique in their own way. It's a fantastic album from start to finish. Every song is like very good. It's like this, it's got it all, like you said. It's
a power pop. It's a power pop classic. Great sequencing. Everything works. Yeah, the subject matter, a lot of teen lust. But hey, yeah, I don't know if you could record that record today, but I still dig it. Good Girls Don't. Come on. My Sharona. God, My Sharona in the summer of 79.
It's amazing how little you hear that album anymore when you think about how much we heard it back in the day, and especially those two songs. But there were some others on there that were just it's all good, and it's a lot of it's fun. It's fast paced.
Yeah. It's good. It's all right. I like it. I was kind of surprised it was my number one, but I thought I just can't. I don't know. It just made a big impact. So it is what it is. My number one.
So I think my favorite group or my favorite music, or my standby of reliability is the Electric Light Orchestra. I think these guys just forever throughout the 70s just kept putting out this fantastic music, fantastic albums. So the story of this one, and this is the one where this was the first time it was me who went out and bought this album because it was the brothers who went out and bought the album prior to it. But I liked every single, I think about my favorite ELO album is A New World Record. I mean, I think that might be my favorite rock album of all time. I just think it's fantastic. But right up there with it is Face the Music. But this one was one where it was me who beat them to the punch. I think I got this immediately when it was released. Said, okay, I'm going to go out and get this ELO album, and I wasn't disappointed at all. That was a bit different. For one thing, he tried his hand at disco, and or his version of disco. I mean, these are not all out disco songs. They're disco rock songs. They're songs like "You Shine Little Love" or "Last Train to London." Mm-hmm. But it's another one of those albums I used to love listening to it from start to finish. I really enjoy every single song on the album. I mean, I do have my favorites. So my favorites on this one are The Diary of Horace Wimp, Confusion, and On the Run. And I like Wishing's a nice ballad as well. You do notice that the two top 10 hits, which are Don't Bring Me Down and Shine a Little Love, those aren't among my favorites. I think a lot of that is just they were overplayed. So don't like them as much as if they weren't overplayed. But I think those other songs I mentioned, they could play them all they want. I don't think I would get tired of them. Okay, now here's a fun little trivial fact about this album.
Okay.
And is
No, what?
ever watch Everybody Loves Raymond?
Yeah.
That's Brad Garrett.
Nah.
Yeah, that is Brad Garrett.
I'll be darned. I'll have to look at that
Yeah.
again.
That is Brad Garrett. So that's he posed for this album. And he is the genie. So just kind of a little interesting bit of trivia.
There you go.
We
not
the
only,
last 2 years.
we're always here to inform you. You're here to learn, everyone. So there you go. You've just learned some trivia.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I don't know what else he was doing. He was a comedian. I don't know if I'm imagining back in 1979 he was still. So this was the first of their albums to hit #1 on the UK charts. Here in the United States, did pretty well. Peaked at #5, sold 2 million copies. And then the next thing they did was Xanadu, and whenever I get my show off the ground, The Sound of Soundtracks, I don't know if I can ever watch that movie enough to be able to talk about that that album, which has some pretty good songs in relation to the movie because it's such an unwatchable movie, and yet the soundtrack is so good. So anyway, I'll say, I think if you're going to force me to pick a favorite, sure,
that's your favorite. So
let's call that my favorite of 1979. Sure,
that's good. Yeah. I think that was probably the last. Well, I'm not going to say. I don't know. I think Out of the Blue was probably the peak, even though some people think that album is not quite as good as the previous record. I mean, think about Out of the Blue. That was an ambitious effort. 2 records set. But think about it when that came out, the big gatefold, the artwork came with a mobile. It came with, all those insert. I mean, it was you think the record company was behind it? Gee whiz. That thing sold well. I mean,
they did the Spaceship Tour.
They did the Spaceship Tour.
They did the Spaceship Tour, which they never did in Montreal. They were supposed to appear. That was going to be one of the first concerts they ever went to. I had tickets, and the night before they were supposed to perform in the Montreal Forum, they didn't like the tax situation, how much taxes they were going to have to pay, and then we all had to get our money back. It was very disappointing. Finally, I saw them about 5 years ago in LA. I finally got to see ELO live, and then the next year I went to go see them again in Toronto. So.
Well, that situation that you mentioned, did that hurt ELO the way they were perceived in Canada? Did that hurt their career at all? Because that just seems like, wow, that's kind of, you know what I mean?
It might not have been an all of Canada thing. It might have been a Quebec thing.
Okay.
So their album still did very well in Canada. There was no, there was no backlash there. Their album just continued to sell, and I think everybody just got on with life. So.
All right, cool.
But yeah, there you go.
So 1979, one of the best years in music. I want to thank Dave Lubin for coming on. God, so many great choices, and we could have easily done 20, but we would have been here all night. What's next? I don't know, but we'll figure out something. We'll pick out another year, and we will cover that because there's so many great years to pick from. 78 might be a good year. Just to throw it out there. But you'll see Dave back on the channel. We'll concoct something. So please like, subscribe. You know the whole routine. Please share this with your friends. Let us know. What's your favorites from 1979? Give us your top 10 rating. Dave and I'd like to know. We'll respond. We'll check it out. We do want to hear from you. So Dave, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Brett, as always.
Is there any, I know Dave's working on his channel. Any progress on that?
We'll have something out by the summer.
All right, awesome.
We're gonna focus on movie soundtracks.
Oh, cool. All right. So look forward to that. When Dave gets closer, we will provide the link to his channel. So please check it out when it's up, and we'll keep you posted. You'll see Dave before that. And then please like, subscribe to his channel. But based on that, I don't have anything more to add. So, all right, everybody, we'll see you. Keep it real.
Thanks, everyone.